G'day, I'm Ali Amo, and this is the Lease on Life podcast. Today I have with me Pip Rae. Pip is a social justice advocate with extensive knowledge of legislation and public policy in several areas, including personal, domestic, sexual, and family violence. She specialises in survivor strategy, support for vulnerable people, and community education for both individuals and services. So, how are you, Pip? Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today.
So that was a lot of information. Can you give us a rundown of the kinds of things that you actually do in that space?
Yeah, so I've often referred clients who are experiencing some form of abuse or violence or injustice, basically, and they're not getting any traction with any of the agencies that they're trying to report those matters to. So I give them some advice and some strategies after listening to their story and point them in the direction that will give them the outcomes that they're looking for.
So what are the kinds of experiences you find quite common with? We'll start with more domestic situations and family situations. What are the common cycles you're starting to see play out?
Yeah, I love that word cycles because I really do think it is. And I think if we can understand ourselves better, we will also see that there are cycles within ourselves that impact then on the people around us that are then affected by the services or the community that we're in or that we're receiving. And then there's that sort of that global stuff that is also impacting on us. Some of the more common ones in domestic and family violence is obviously our age and stage relationship that we have with the people that we either live with or that we're family that we were born into. There is a number of, I guess, cyclical pressures that play out in that. And I'm happy to unpack those a little bit more, but it's the dynamics of each relationship and the parent. There might be the sibling relationship that's going on. And quite often that is dictated by the various dynamics in that as well. So it's a complex and layered situation, but it also poses some real harms to development and also autonomy and freedoms, as well as the ability for us to become independent humans, which is ultimately the goal of every parent with their children.
So you also work with all kinds of vulnerable people, not just in the family dynamic. You also deal with gender and sexuality issues within families and some of the outcomes as a result. And obviously there's religious stuff in there as well. It just depends on the nature of a family structure, really.
Yeah, we call those contributing or influencing factors. So it's things like your age, your sex, the gender that you're born into or the gender that you identify as. They have a lot of social and historical pressures around them. And then you've also got those ages and stages. So whether the parents are together or if separated and what the dynamics are there, but also you've got the age as well. So as people get older, they become more vulnerable, just like they were as children, because sometimes that part of their life is missing some of the relationships that they used to have when they were in the family unit.
What are the physical cycles or the expression of what's going on inside? What are those things that you start to see? If we stick with the family issues that we have around gender and sexuality, what are some of the physical expressions of the cycle of abuse that you see?
Yeah, well, and a lot of those expressions are driven by our patriarchal society that we live in, or the cultural obligations that we have, or religious obligations, and then they reinforce the gender stereotypes inside a family unit, which we are conditioned to play out.
Looking at the issues that people with different sexual preferences have within a family structure that go against the typical cycles that we see of what's considered norms. What are the kinds of expression that you have experienced of that cycle of abuse within a family structure?
What we see is the expression of trying to please, trying to conform, trying to fit in. There's a lot of shame and blame that is internalized because of not feeling like they can be accepted. And that creates that internal conflict, which would also impact on the external conflict between either parents and their children or siblings. And it's a dynamic that is often just an influencing or a contributing factor to the violence, not the actual driver, which is really about those gender or social norms and the expectations that we have of both men and women, or of a particular identity that we have.
A lot of the issues stem around the family members almost forcing the conformism to a certain sexual preference or identity around that. So you also get the same sort of thing when it comes to issues around gender within a family as well, right?
Yeah, and they're all very much interlaced with each other, depending on what the parents and their expectations of a gender might be, or if there is a constriction or a conformity that they have to meet to be that type of family unit that they want, then that plays out in the relationship and the dynamics between the parent and a child or the child and another sibling.
I imagine it would be quite challenging to have a family member break your own belief cycle about what constitutes gender or sexuality in certain regards in different religions. What are the more mental and emotional cycles that you find the vulnerable person going through? What's the common mental and emotional cycles that you're being told about?
The most common cycle that people experience is self doubt and not being good enough. And they come up for people when they are being challenged, when they feel like they've made a mistake or they haven't made a good choice and it hasn't been the outcome that they were seeking. That self blame, shame, and how do you fix it without getting into trouble, sort of thing. So we need people to be very supportive in other people's choices and respecting them and then helping them and to get to where they actually want to go. It's not difficult and it's not rocket science, but we just place our own bias and our own lens on what we think it should be for them, instead of actually listening to them and helping them achieve what it is that they want.
That challenge for an individual in a family is also mirrored externally in the services of communities and our societies, correct?
Yeah, we now have a very different perspective and a number of lenses that public policy has to go through in order to be inclusive, and not divisive of those types of differences or nuances or even the minorities. So that's normally referred to as marginalisation.
The marginalized people of a community have expanded further than race and religion now, and it's also gender and sexuality.
And disability
Yes.
and ageism.
Yeah.
So there's a range of them, and also even culturally as well. So here in Australia, we definitely recognise the contribution of our First Nations people and their beliefs and cultures and practices that they have had for, thousands of years.
I was also reading somewhere recently that a person's physical weight is one of the major factors of discrimination. After age comes someone's weight. Is that something you're familiar with yourself?
I'll probably experience that, but everybody goes through that. And I think there's a very shallow way of viewing the world. I've had medical issues with my thyroid and with
Mm.
adrenals. And it's not to say that I don't live a healthy lifestyle. That I think is the personal bias or a personal choice that people reflect. And it is very much in that narcissistic world of what is perfect or what is important or what's perfect for them.
You actually brought up a social buzzword at the moment. I'm seeing so much information coming out about narcissists and being the victim of a narcissist. Given that you are in the space of domestic violence and domestic abuse, sexual abuse and sexual violence, I expect that narcissists or narcissistic tendencies are the traits that you're starting to be notified of.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a skeptic. I think that behavior is behavior, and labeling it with something like narcissism is extremely toxic because it then gets bandied around too much and people are actually not then focused on the types of behaviors in the context of the situation, which could be just really bad behavior. It could be criminal behavior. It's a number of things, but really it just comes down to the choices in the way that we treat everybody. So a narcissist, the distinction is that they treat everybody like that. They don't just treat one person like that. Or there's a set of behaviors that they use to elicit what they want for their benefit. They don't do it to everybody. So they're not real narcissists because it's not a personality trait. It's a choice of behaviors to who they're having that relationship with.
So, what are the kinds of commonalities that you do see when it comes to domestic issues?
It's, it's three, the top three are basically sex, parenting, and finances. And they are very much the drivers around conflict because we have different views. And so if you're not on the same page as your partner in those three particular areas, they actually then feed out into everything else, things like economic opportunities, financial freedom, uh, parenting styles. And then you've also got whether or not that leads to affairs or sexual betrayal. All of that is really contained within the relationship. That's what actually represents a good, healthy, and functioning relationship. And we need to understand that domestic, sexual, and personal violence is unhealthy relationship. That's what the base level is. Whether or not it then tips into a criminal or a civil matter that requires some level of protection or family issues that are dealt with in family court to divide property and parenting issues, then yeah, it's really that's the thing. It can be quite complex when you're trying to unpack it. But they're generally the commonalities and all the abusive behaviors that go with that. So whether it's a parent abusing a child, abusing their finances, or even betraying the trust and the respect of the relationship that they're in with their partner.
What are some of the markers that you find repeatedly coming up with partnered relationships
Yeah, I think
to signify abuse?
we call them indicators. I
Okay.
guess in our space, we look for certain language and words that are used, responses to information or in a conversation or where there might be conflict and how that plays out. So
Yeah,
quite
give me an
often,
example.
yeah. So when we see what they call high conflict or conflict between couples, it's usually the role that they play. So whether or not they are the aggressor or the receiver, or whether or not they are then the responder as well. And quite often you can be one or both out of the three of them. So quite often a person who is being, I guess, targeted for abuse is then also sometimes the person that ends up rescuing the perpetrator because they then play the victim role of suffering from something else and they've just taken it out on their partner. That those dynamics again. What role are you playing in the arguments or the conflict or the chaos that's unfolding?
One of the things that I've noticed keep popping up, particularly with women with partners who are abusive, whether it becomes physical or not, just the emotional and mental side of the
Mm,
abuse. The I don't want to use the word excuse, but it's this, but he had a hard life, or
yeah,
there was a
that's sometimes
struggle that he
yeah.
had in his childhood, or how do you classify that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple to elicit sympathy from people when you've had bad experiences and you're looking for that comfort. That's just what it is. Partners are doing that. That's what this level of support in a relationship actually looks like. It's supporting people through that difficult growth or transformation or healing. It's when they use that situation to then, after abusing their partner, using it as the means to elicit them to their partner to come and rescue them from that and not taking accountability for the behavior or the action or the inaction that they subjected them to. And that is the abusive part of it. So that's what we look for in those indicators as to what sort of behaviors are they doing to resolve the conflict, to acknowledge the hurt that might have been caused if they actually just targeted them with the abuse, and also to accept that harm and what the restoration process would look like. Apologies are always great, but if behavior continues, then the apology means nothing. And that trust and belief is diminished because the likelihood of it in continuing and causing the harm is more probable and possible than unlikely.
Well, it's almost like the apology becomes part of the end of the physical expression of that cycle, but it's going to go back around
Yeah.
again and happen on repeat.
Well, it's the remorse that they show in the cycle. So there's definitely a build up in that cycle. There's an explosive, and it's not always violent either. I think that's really important. It could be the silent treatment. It could be not being spoken to, stonewalled, locked out, excluded. So
Stonewalled? What is stonewalled?
stonewalling is a form of domestic abuse where information is, it's like gatekeeping. So information is withheld or affection is withheld, engagement is withheld. So people usually need a little bit of time I'm one of those people who like to solve problems in the minute, in the moment. Tell me what we need to do to resolve this so we can move on. Whereas other people might need, 5 or 10 minutes. They might need 2 or 3 days. But it's really important that you communicate what that style for you is. And really it depends on the incident as well. So we've had things where everything just gets shut down and then they don't know where they stand. They're
What's going
left
to
in,
happen? Yeah.
and they're left in that agony of uncertainty, especially if the other partner comes back and then acts as if nothing's happened. That's probably the most harmful because then they don't want to actually bring it up
Address the
again
issue. Yeah.
because they don't want the argument or the violence to continue.
For the people out there listening, many of us are in relationships and it's natural to have conflict and to have issues. But what would be the 3 biggest red flags you can think of? It's a tough call. 3
Yeah.
biggest red flags. And if they are things that are quite common, to know the difference between unhealthy and healthy. Does that,
Yeah.
to become aware of the presence of abuse in your relationship.
I'm really big on helping women identify their boundaries and enforcing them. I think that that's something that we need to do. So if they're continually crossing your boundaries, engaging in behavior that hurts you, upsets you, hijacks your time, is aggressive, or even neglectful, then you really have to look at whether or not you're actually compatible and how much you're overextending yourself to be in that relationship. And having had personal experience of that, it's because you love them, because you want it to work. There will be sometimes where we are very generous. I guess it's just looking at the frequency, the intensity of that generosity and the cost to yourself. Like, does it steal your confidence? Does it diminish your capacity to live the life that you want to live? That would be one.
Yeah.
More?
And that is a big one.
Yeah, that is a big one. So the second one would be the impact, like looking at the red flags of impact is what we would really love people to understand. And that is that there are always going to be natural consequences to choices and behavior. And it really is about what your window of tolerance is. And if we can identify what those thresholds are around how many times can he cheat, or how much money can he spend, or how many times can she call me a bitch?
Yeah. Or leave to go on a boys' weekend and go MIA for days on end.
Yeah.
How many times can you find evidence of other?
Yeah. And how much evidence do you really need? With my previous employment, having that, it's been drilled into me that I require evidence and I can't make an assessment. So without that. And that forced me to actually lose my gut instinct or lose connection with it. So I stopped trusting my gut instinct and saying that I need to be able to prove that in order for me to make a decision about it. But I would really encourage everybody to really tap into those gut instincts because quite often you don't need that evidence to actually make a decision. You can just say, this is impacting me in a way that is so negative that I'm not coping. And without either a change in behavior or assistance and support, you're going to carry that with you through the whole relationship and make adaptive strategies that would probably be at your cost.
Guaranteed, I'd say, to be at your cost. Isn't that maladaptive? Is that what that word
We
is?
don't call it maladaptive because it sounds negative. So what I try to do is
okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
so because sometimes they are good at good adaptations, and it's actually part of it might be part of your personal growth. So not everything is maladaptive, but it's definitely an adaptation to either the deficit in the relationship or the wanting to grow and be a better version of yourself.
When you do come across people who can recognize that there is abuse in their relationship, that it's unhealthy, and that the impact is so negative that they do not want to continue this way,
Mm.
having that acceptance is part of the process, but that fear of letting go, of walking away, of the unknown, that's another level to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you only have to reflect on your own personal experiences in any relationship that you've had, or whether it's going to a new job or
Leaving a job, even when there's no
yeah,
job to replace it with. It's the
yeah,
same kind of scenario, just played out in a different capacity.
yeah. And I think that there is a lot of grief around relationships when they don't work because not only are you losing what you thought you had, and that's where probably the impact for betrayal is so much deeper, but you're also grieving what you thought you were going to have in the future.
Mm.
So this is now a void. And while it's an opportunity, growth and an opportunity to find a new way of doing things, that is still a grief that needs to be processed. And it's something that we have as a universal issue and it's collective around the world. So change is inevitable, but how good we are at adapting to that change and making it a better situation for ourselves can be really challenging for people.
What would be the ideal support to be able to facilitate someone transitioning out of an unhealthy relationship? When you're on that line where
Mm,
you're better off without somebody in your life, but you're uncertain on what to do, because people can stay there. I've stayed there for months. Some people can stay for years, and it's even more
yeah,
complicated when there's
children.
children.
And houses and find like when that spaghetti all of our family assets are all there,
Yeah,
including the kids.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've had personal experience for that, and I think that really did form part of the basis of my women's wellbeing and change behaviour program, where
Mm.
for me, I'd done enough counselling, I could see what was going on, and it was changing the way that I thought about myself as well as the way that I thought about him and also the way that I wanted to raise my children. Or like that talking about what's happened is the settling of, okay, it hasn't been what I wanted. So how do I make it better? But I actually engaged in a life coach, to be honest, that one that helped me set more goals. So that they were the person that created the vision of what I wanted my life to look like. And you need to be able to be at a point where you can transition from always talking about the trauma or always talking about the abuse or the violence. That's my number one question when I speak to the victim this time. I said, what would this look like if you weren't dealing with abuse or the violence or the conflict? And it, it shifts their mind to where they want to be. And then from there, we reverse engineer all the strategies.
What are some of the strategies that work in this kind of scenario?
Some of the strategies are basically looking at all the options. If it was a blank canvas, what could that be? What could you create from absolutely nothing? So it's like training, having an education, getting a job, becoming financially independent, saving money, traveling, engaging in therapies that are creative. So art has been an amazing source of inspiration for many people because it's expressive, non-judgmental.
It's also a good way to process some of the difficult emotions that you might not be able to talk about comfortably,
Yeah.
but gives you a safe space to do that.
Yep, and it engages mindfulness because you're
Mm.
actually sinking yourself into a project. It might be writing, or it might be journaling, or it might be woodwork. Like whatever it is that it takes you out of the life admin that we have every day, and gives you time and space to think about what you want to create.
Life admin, I love that word, that phrase. Good way to put it, because you do spend a lot of your life doing the admin stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And checking your back on the life admin stuff and planning for the life admin stuff. Part of that planning process needs to be supported because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know and you don't know what's out there. So
Mm.
finding somebody to help you do that and then by natural curiosity and keeping that sort of mindset that, oh, well, I wonder where that will lead and getting excited about it actually becomes the good anxiety instead of fear of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Mm.
You can start to get on a path of excitement because you can see that whatever you do actually has a natural consequence and there's something that's going to follow it. And you actually have a lot more control over that than you realize.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about you is you take it outside of the individual and you start bringing it into the social and the global spheres. So you're a bit of a game changer and a change maker, especially when it comes to the legislation and informing services. You actually run programs to inform and teach really different service providers how to handle people in given scenarios, how to approach, how to communicate, while showing respect and compassion to someone in that situation. What are some of the bigger wins that you've had that you're really proud of?
I've been really lucky to be able to contribute to a lot of the conversation, which has been great, and just bring my own experiences. And I think something that I've really acknowledged that when I was a young police officer at 19, our society was very different and it had different rules. And we can't keep the judgments of today against what happened 30 years ago because there were different circumstances. So we need to be able to move on and again adapt to what changes have been made. And I've seen significant changes in quality, equity, acceptance, especially around gender issues, for which I was apparently a crazy feminist back in my early years, which was actually just now translated to, oh, feminism. Yeah. Yeah. I want something for equality. So, well, you feel like it's a little bit radical. It's actually not. So being part of that change maker squad is really about just continuing to take responsibility that I am one person, but I'm also part of a bigger community and we all contribute to the wave of change. It's never really just one person. We have to have collective thought and be on the same page to be able to go, that's no longer acceptable. And that is acceptable, but we'd like to see the outcomes a little bit different to that. That's what I've been unfortunate to be a part of. Some of the other big wins have been quite personal because whenever you're the individual up against an organization, it can be quite daunting and trying to prove that you have the evidence of the way that it went or even that they're common and archaic beliefs, really inappropriate
In this day and age, yeah.
but the new set of rules of engagement here is isolating as well. I think my husband summed it up the nicest way and said, nobody likes you because of who you are. And I went, how? So my belief system in gender equality, it's very difficult for people who haven't got my knowledge and skill. And I'd love to give people a USB and let them unload my experiences so that they can build up for themselves, but they don't have it. So you can only respect people for the experience. And that's what makes lived experts a real source of information and insight. 'Cause nobody can find the words to describe the minute by minute experience that they may have had. You can get a general view, but even then that is tainted with bias and your opinions and conditioning. And my levels of resilience aren't the same as somebody who's never had my experiences either. So a reasonable person no longer exists, I say. You've got a reasonable person was always defined as a man, and that really does need to change moving forward because
Most definitely.
they are not reasonable. Their standards are very much rooted in gendered issues, such as the social norms around what men and what will accept from each other and how fearful they are of each other if they go against them or how much they have to support somebody who is also a male because that's where they get their acceptance from. So lots of, whereas women are probably not, it's not that they're more sensitive, it's just that they have emotional responses, which have typically been called hysteric. And we have a whole background then of witchery and sorcery and causing issues for men when really what we're fighting for is the gender equity and equality that we deserve as a human.
So you would be finding going into an organization, you might be focused on breaking a specific belief cycle to create new experience cycles that are positive. But you're breaking so many cycles, it becomes overwhelming because each individual has their own stuff that they're bringing in and history, the historical cycles, which are very much global. And they've been distilled into their societies for so long that these individuals, it's almost that cognitive dissonance because everything you do is a challenge. Everything you say, everything you're bringing forward is a challenge to what they've considered normal their whole lives. So
Yeah.
I truly applaud you for the courage. You know that saying that a book, the courage to be disliked?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I am very much encouraged to embrace that book. And I've been told I should probably read that because I guess I've just elevated my level of confidence above the opinions of others. And that took a long time to build. Like that was constantly going out and testing myself, building sound conversations and analogies and like exactly what we're doing here today is having conversations with people that they go, oh, actually, I've never looked at it like that before.
Mm.
Even with my women's wellbeing and change behavior program, people challenge me, say, well, why should women have to change? And it's like saying, well, there's that saying, if you bang your head against the wall every day and nothing changes, nothing changes. So you can only change what you can control. And we are the people that we control. And you can't change. And you can't change others. So I mean, just it makes sense that yes, you are going to create conflict when you create change because people are getting something out of the way that they're doing things. There's a real reward for the way that people behave.
Mm. I truly admire the work that you do and it serves to benefit all of us. And speaking of the book, you're actually on the home stretch of completing your own. Oh yeah, I'll put you on blast for that.
Okay.
Yes. So you're writing the big book of abuse and focusing on how to understand it. Why don't you give us a little snippet of what we got in store in that book?
Yeah, this is something that's been on my shelf, literally on my creative shelf for about 4 years. And it's so through my own experiences and work that I do and the discovery of what different behaviors and how they're labeled and how we put them into categories or it might be formulas and styles or types that we see. And it really is about defining those behaviors or those labels and giving examples. But not only that, it extends to actually providing some case studies and some reference points for people who may have never experienced that. So that lived experience type of immersion where you can go, actually, and it's only when we do see that that we go, see, yeah, that is what I went through. And we see that a lot in the movies or on television. So that's how we get points of reference. Um, and then I've extended a little bit and talked about and what an appropriate response to that sort of abuse is because as we were talking before this, not all abuse is criminal. And there are some behaviors that are just really either inappropriate, unsolicited, and they've had this massive impact on us. But weighing up whether or not that should be in a criminal jurisdiction or whether or not it should just be civil protection that you're afforded to stop that from happening and disturbing and disrupting your life again can be really hard for people. So I think in that final stage of providing those responses, it's about empowering people with language and statements that put people in their place respectfully when they are engaging in that type of behavior, but also educating people that not all of it actually ends up being held to account. Sometimes losing the relationship is the consequence or not having access to your children will be the consequence of that behaviour. There's a lot, and this is saying we need to reframe justice in the Australian society so that it is in aligned with community expectation. And that is never going to be delivered in a courtroom, especially while they are afforded the protection of not having to provide a defence and then also the opportunity to provide a justification and excuse for some sort of reasonableness that their behaviour was appropriate. So we have to decide and define those boundaries ourselves.
Yeah.
It's time to take back their power and control over our own lives. And if people are going to be nasty or abusive towards us and violent, then they don't get to be a part of your life anymore, unfortunately. And that's also going for people who are, especially people who are parents. And there are natural consequences for that. And that may mean that you don't see your children. And that's not on anyone else but the person who chose to behave that way.
Mm. So if you're interested in reading, understanding the big book of abuse, look out for it. It'll be released in February. Thanks for being with us, Pip. And thanks for being here with me on this ep. New ones will come out to you every other Thursday. If you'd like to get a copy of my book, just head to my website, www.weboflife.au. If you'd like to stay up to date in the world of Ali Ammo, follow me on social.